mention it because it's a day after the elections 3 years ago. And many people believe that this is really the two-thirds point in the term of the People's Progressive Party in office. But it's not. As you know, elections will be held sometime in November, December of 2025. So there's still nearly another 3 years to go, largely because of the extended delay that we had in declaring the results, and then the period after convening Parliament. You have a 3 months period within the whole elections, and Parliament was convened in September of 2020. So there is time in the future to implement the aggressive plans that we've laid out to transform this country. But I just wanted to go back and to remind people in this country, because often we have very short memories, about the carefully coordinated plan to rig the elections. We recall that APNU started off with an attempt to digitize the records at GRO, but from our intelligence, again, the digitization process there was intended to add people to the database at GRO, issue fraudulent birth certificates to them, many of whom would have been immigrants to this country, and then have them register to vote at the election period. That was the purpose of the so-called digitization of the records at GRO. That was followed by the unilateral, illegal installation of a chairman at GCOM. The third exercise that they embarked upon, pursuant to the task of rigging the elections, was to start an illegal house-to-house registration, and that we had to go to the court again to stop that process. And the idea again then, from all that we gathered, was to, in the registration process, not register substantial blocks of PPP supporters or in PPP support areas. And the period for to get them on the list, to make a claim, would have been so short that we would have never been able to get them back onto the list. And the list would have then, there would have been a rush to the elections, and those people would have been disenfranchised. We then saw a number of other things that, in retrospect, were part of the master plan. In every region, the RO's office was in a different building. But in Region 4, they could have easily have the RO's office outside of the building that the Secretariat was housed in. But they placed the Region 4 office in the building where the Secretariat was. And that was with the intent at some stage to take charge of that process, which they did. Some of the Secretariat staff, for which they are now facing court action. So that was a clever move that we did not see at that time, but in retrospect was part of the master plan. Now, clearly what has happened, and I'm not going to belabor the point because there'll be many other opportunities to look at the dynamics of the rigging and what we had to do at every stage to counter these measures. From the moment no confidence motion was filed. We knew, although that night they accepted and said we'd have to go to elections within 3 months as in accordance with our constitution, they subsequently reneged on that. And then we had to go through a long process to force them to hold elections, these issues subsequently. Because I think it's time we put this on record now, how we saw these events in real time and what we were doing to minimize their impact or to make them nullify their effectiveness. That is the attempts to rig the elections. And it involved a number of people. Of course, at the center of the rigging plot is the APNU AFC coalition, but they involve elements within the police force and other organizations as part of the plot. And I'm going to deal with that subsequently. But one thing is clear today to the people of this country, is that when APNU came into office in 2015, they came in with great goodwill. They had sold a story that many people in this country bought, that they were competent, they had a clear plan to change the country, that the PPP had done a poor job at economic development and that they are going to change that. Secondly, that they were clean because the PPP was corrupt, and this is a clean group coming in to transform the country and to get rid of corruption. And three, that they were multiracial, that they catered for the interests of all Guyanese regardless of race. Three fallacies that were proven to be fallacies in their tenure in office. And today, every single Guyanese, every single person in this country, because they had a track record for 5 years, can now say with certainty that the last government was the most incompetent in our history, the most corrupt in our history, and the government that in such a short period managed to devastate interracial terms some of the communities that Indo-Guyanese and Amerindians live in. We saw serious action that were dedicated towards removing large numbers of people from the public sector as part of a master plan to have either them migrate or dispossess them. So we now know for sure that they're not competent, they're not clean, and that they're probably the most racist government that we've ever seen. And we're happy that the country have had that exposure to them, because it makes very hollow their protestations now when you see them playing the victim. They're playing the victim now of all sorts of so-called government plots, that people can now assess them based on their own track record. And you know what is gratifying to me? That there are a whole generation of Guyanese who grew up under the PPP in a condition of freedom. They could not relate to the early PNC and the attempt to rig elections in this country, how for 3 decades they hung on to power through rigged elections with devastating consequences for the political economy of this country, for people's livelihoods, and the consequences for national, social, and economic formation. Many of our people had to flee this country because they could not eat, they could not find a job. That was the real history of our country, when people were discriminated against. The police came to your home because of if you criticized the government. A whole generation population of Guyanese did not even know that existed. They didn't even know. I spoke to many young people who didn't know that it was illegal to eat bread made from wheat in this country. They grew up because they grew up under the PPP. They took all the freedoms. They lied as in a manner that came naturally to them. Until today, we have this view that their SOPs will show that they won the elections. And they keep saying this around the country, they won the elections, but can't produce a shred of evidence. They could easily, they have the SOPs that we have. They could have easily made their case, presenting their SOPs. They saw APNU. They had over 2,000 polling agents, hardcore PNC, AFC people who were in those polling places, who signed those statements of poll. And APNU denied all of them. Like in the Bible, they just denied them. These are people who poured their hearts out for APNU and said the PPP bribed them to sign the statements of poll. And I don't know who will want to be a polling agent anymore ever again for that party. Because they did a great job, sat in the poll all day long, look out for their interests, signed the statements of poll, and then in the recount, that's their claim. But the country and young people in this country have seen APNU. This is the typical APNU. So today we have seen a new set of issues emerging. They've gone back to the old playbook. If you look at their playbook in that period, they would hobnob a lot with the international community. They will get a supporting group of NGOs to criticize the government, write reports, and hope that somehow in the international community, as erroneous as those reports are, that they will influence opinion making and policy in those countries in relation to Guyana. So we are very familiar with that playbook, and they're at it again. And the same players are there. They come in new formulations. They're sometimes new configurations, but they're still there, the same old players of the past. And they're at it again. But it's not going to work now, because we're going to be more aggressive on calling people out, and we're going to make sure that the international community sees these bodies for what they are, and these individuals. And so, we have seen it already. Until now, we've had silence from the TIGI that submitted a report in 2019 which said that the APNU stopped at the parking meter scandal, when we know that it was the PNC in control of the City Hall that was at the center of the scandal, and that Vulcan, as minister, gave approval for its introduction, and that it was only because of the battle of civil society that was stopped. But the TIGI submitted a report to Transparency International saying that APNU had stopped that. It was we know that the contract, the 2016 contract, that APNU hit that contract, the PSA, and then the TIGI wrote the international community and in their report and said that APNU had released this contract, abstracting from the battle that civil society, the newspapers, the political parties in opposition had fight to get this done. Ministers or senior officials on the APNU, 75 scandals. From the first week that they started with the facility that they call a stadium, the wooden facility here that they call Durban Park. So we can list that to the last days that they were in office when they transferred. At the beginning, they started a week after they got into office, collecting money illegally, telling us they didn't need public money to build the stadium. We ended up putting a public bill of over $1 billion, 600 million Ghana dollars unaccounted for in the Auditor General report. To the last days, even when they lost the elections, Jordan was busy transferring land to people and top officials of the APNU. Throughout, from the beginning to the end of their tenure, I can fill in the scandals every week that they had. But the TIGI was silent on that, totally silent. That's why I said it's the most venal government, corrupt government that we've ever had in our history. And we've seen this again from some of the other groupings. I'm not going to go through all of these groups here today, but of recent, we have seen, let's take this latest issue, just to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So the Auditor General has been issuing in his reports about people in government properties. If you check the Auditor General's report historically, you will see that every year the Auditor General speaks about people who illegally occupied government property. If you look at 2020 report, the Auditor General has mentioned about illegal occupation of government properties, including in Region 9. Now, the REO, and let me make it very clear, we have insisted that the recommendations have to be pursued. The Auditor General's recommendations. When the accounting officers for the ministries and the regions go to the Public Accounts Committee, they're hammered by both sides about not taking action on the Auditor General's report. The accounting officers are the REOs for the region. The Region 9 REO has written 3 letters. So when APNU pretends that this was a spur of the moment thing, etc., they never knew about attempts to have them remove themselves from the property, the government property. We have 3 letters here written. The first was written to Amnali in 2021, and then 2 letters written to Gita Chandler about the same building. Since 2021, 3 notices from the RU pursuant to the Auditor General's report. Now, I have here the inventory of Region 9, and the building is listed as belonging to the region. This property is the property of the region. So, let me make it clear at the beginning. There was no direction on the part of the People's Progressive Party to have APNU evicted from the building that they were illegally occupying. There was no direction from the central government to have this done. This was done at a regional level pursuant to the job that the REOs have at the technical level. Now, APNU, if they want, they can easily apply for a piece of land. And we may be willing to give them the land in return if they want to build an office, but properly on land that they own. We've seen this impunity from the PNC forever. It's impunity. They've occupied literally tens of properties, valuable state properties across the country for many, many years that they don't have any records for. That I'm sure they don't have any record for ownership here. And they have occupied several properties across this country. You imagine if the PPP had done that with one state property, it would have been a big scandal. They have done this over many, many years with impunity. But here it is that a technical officer is doing his job because the Auditor General is saying properties belonging to the state must be treated in a particular fashion. So I see now that they are playing the victim again. So somebody goes to speak to the international community, looking for sympathy, in accordance with the old playbook, big bad PPP throwing us out of a building. So let me tell you about some of the conversations I've had with many of the diplomats. They're disgusted at the daily excursions of APNU people who are trying to influence them. Daily excursions that they make to these places. They're disgusted with it. The people say to me, we're not a grievance forum for the PNC. So they think they would snap a picture and put it in the newspapers and think that would influence us or the international community. I would have liked when they gone there to complain, the international community should say, can you show us the ownership documents for the land that you're on? And then say to them, you've been illegally, with impunity, occupying state land. You should comply. Secondly, they should ask them about the racism. I'd love to hear how the Amanza Desir would answer about PNC's racism. Because I have a long list of questions I can give to them about PNC racism. But one thing we will not do, there will be no reverse discrimination. We're not going to start discriminating against Indo-Guyanese or Amerindians to prove a point. Because we work for all the people of this country, everyone. We don't, as I said this before, every single community in this country will see progress under the PPP. So the new narrative is, oh, who's getting the contracts? They will not even say who's bidding for the contracts, who's getting the contracts. And they falsify all the narrative. But we are dealing with that separately. If they think that the old playbook will work, it will not work anymore. They've gone that, it's war. They have to come up with a new strategy. But what's the new strategy? You don't have any plans for anything, including any sectors. You don't have views on economic issues. I see on the oil and gas sector, they're practically led by the nose by Kaitro News. Kaitro News asked them a question and fearful because they feel incompetent, can't answer it. They say, yes, we agree with it. We agree with it. This happened too in the period up to 2015. This is what the opposition has come down to. No plans, no studied view on economic issues, no track record, can only talk about racism. And they're going after the old playbooks, the playbook, and about racism. So we are going to, they will not find the PPP working. In the past, we just focus on development and we didn't tackle these issues. We're not apologetic about our plans because our plans cater for all the people of this country. And we're not apologetic about fighting and calling out PNC's racism, because that's the most racist party that we've had. Their demeanor, their policies, everything else. They have nothing else. So, imagine they get so outraged by an illegality. They're committing an illegality and trying to present themselves as victims. This is the worst sort of issue. And really, I've seen an attempt to resurrect Burnham now. They're writing every day about Burnham. And you know what? I don't want to be critical of that era. We've gone past it. But really, the reason they're doing that is because of the deficit of leadership now. Imagine they have to go back to try to find inspiration from 50 years ago, and especially from someone who rigged all the elections that he's won, and that's documented. It's because of the deficit of leadership now. They have absolutely no leadership. They're hoping somehow a reference to the period in which Burnham was in power will suddenly change their fortunes. This is it. So they will talk about everything else, but I've asked one question. How would you answer that question? I don't see anybody tackling this one question about President Burnham, which is he was on the CIA payroll until 1970, 4 years after we became an independent country. He was on the payroll of the CIA, and that's revealed in the source documents that have been made public. Why doesn't APNU address that? Imagine a sitting prime minister being on the payroll of the United States Central Intelligence Agency at the time when he was championing third world causes and non-aligned causes. Who? That would qualify as treason for me. That could be treasonous. But nobody answers this question. So that's the only thing I'll say about that, because really, we've seen a party that grasped at straw. Everything they're trying to make an issue of. So I hope that when they go to complain to the international community again, they can take along their ownership documents for the property in Lethem, and they should take along the Auditor General's report. And when they sit in the Public Accounts Committee, they must say to the accounting officers, you must go after everyone else who are in state property except the PNC. Except the PNC. And by the way, if they want a piece of land in Lethem to build their office, they're free to apply. The government will favorably consider it. So if they want to build their offices, wherever they want to build their offices, that doesn't bother the People's Progressive Party. I want to talk a bit about the visit to India, the official visit to India. As you know, it followed a visit from the President and some very intensive discussions that he had with the leadership of the Indian government. And so in my visit, I was there mainly to speak I was invited to speak at the World Sustainable Development Summit, but the trip was converted into an official one. So at the summit, if you follow the news, there I spoke extensively about Guyana and its approach on the forest sector and how we're utilizing those resources, or how we intend to utilize those resources to tackle the issue of adaptation and also livelihoods in the indigenous communities. However, the conference, since it dealt with sustainability, I think in many parts of the world, when you attend these conferences, people speak about sustainability in terms of approaches and preservation of ecosystems. So, how are you utilizing natural resources in a manner that 50 years from now, they will remain in a form that is not a depleting form? And how do you utilize the benefits from those resources to transform people's lives? Or, that is the approach, or can we have a sustainable ecosystem, a forestry ecosystem, ensure that our waterways and water resources remain intact, etc. But at the conference, I sought to deal with the sustainability from the perspective of the justice issues in the climate discussions. And I argue basically that for some countries, it's not a question of sustainability in ecosystems. It's a sustainability of the countries themselves. And if we don't tackle the sustainability of the countries themselves, we could never have a conversation about ecosystems or sustainable approaches. And that's a big gap. So we're often prone to look at the micro without looking at the macro. And for a large group of countries around the world, in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, in Africa, the question now is, can these countries be sustainable as countries themselves? And I pointed out that it goes beyond just climate issues. If you look at the region, say CARICOM, a single catastrophic event, a hurricane wiping out the equivalent of 50 years of accumulated wealth in a country, national wealth, in gross domestic product, in a single event in 2 hours. And without any funds now in the global community to assist these countries to adapt to climate change or to minimize, if not, you can't prevent these events because they're already, the concentration of greenhouse gases is such that it would cause these events, and it's getting worse. We can't avoid these events happening because of the current concentration of greenhouse gases. So the only way to address them is to adapt to the challenges and to minimize the impact of this. And they don't have the resources to do that. They're debt stressed, fiscally stressed, and many of them rely on a single sector that often faces a whole heap of phytosanitary restrictions or trade restrictions on their exports. And so, unless we tackle that issue early, these countries don't have sustainable medium-term pathways. They'll keep losing welfare, they'll keep losing a lot of the capital formation that they've built up for many years, and they may become failed states. And it's a real challenge. And so in Guyana's case, we are not waiting with bated breath on funds for loss and damage or adaptation, because those countries are waiting They go to every climate negotiation and make the place, and they come back empty-handed. And the clock is ticking for some of them. So in our case, money earned through the forestry sector and from the oil and gas industry has to go, or would go towards climate proofing our economy and safeguarding our people. And that means billions of dollars on managing water, protecting our coastal zone, moving to crops that are climate resilient. Since we can't stop these events, we need to now adapt to them. And this is where I pointed out. So all of these conferences we are holding on sustainable water systems and sustainable forestry systems, they sometimes miss sight of the bigger picture for many of these countries, that the countries themselves can be sustainable. And though that was basically some of the tenure of the debate that we're embarked upon now. Yeah, I also, so after Terry, there were lots of other meetings on the sideline where we dealt with some of these issues. And then I met with the Indian government. So I've seen a lot has been written about the MOU that we intend to sign with the Indian government in the oil and gas sector. So the MOU will deal with a number of issues. The MOU will deal with exploring the possibility of trading in crude oil, that is sale of crude oil. But we agreed with the minister that this has to be beneficial to both countries, and it has to follow market conditions. There is no agreement to sell any oil to India at this point in time. And any such agreement in the future will have to be competitive and will have to benefit both parties. Secondly, it deals with strengthening our regulatory capacity and sharing expertise in building capacity in the staff of the Ministry of Natural Resources. India has an enormous capacity in many areas, and we hope to benefit from the strengthening of the regulatory regime, their expertise in strengthening the regulatory regime here for the oil and gas sector, as well as building capacity in the Ministry of Natural Resources. It speaks about the collaboration in the future for natural gas. So we are, as you know, we're embarked upon the gas to energy project that will utilize some of the natural gas that is produced or discovered offshore. We're now pushing Exxon to complete the gas utilization plan. We hope this will be completed very soon, and we are working on our own gas strategy. We're going to get some of the consultants from India and other places to work with us on having a national gas strategy, which will determine what we do with the gas that has been found offshore so far. So it then deals with potential areas for bilateral cooperation in exploration and developing our resources. So as you know, we started this off by saying that we were exploring whether we would utilize all the areas offshore through a national oil company, or we will go to auction. We decided at this stage we are not going to establish a national oil company, and we went out to auction for 14 areas. There are several areas remaining offshore that were not auctioned or not part of the current auction. Those areas will be available for bilateral engagements. We then have sometime next year the relinquishment of 20% of the Stabroek block, and those areas will be available also for bilateral, and possibly if the bilateral agreements don't yield the results that we hope they would yield, they would also be available for auction. So we have made no definitive decision on the 20% being relinquished, that those would be all available for bilateral engagements or auction, although they are potentially available for the discussions at the bilateral level, and that is what we spoke of in India, and we have also indicated that to several other governments that are interested in participating at the bilateral level with us, because we believe that some bilateral engagements could complement the more commercial type engagements with the private sector that we're getting through the auctions. So that there be no agreement on any bilateral engagement with any government so far. All of the areas are available, but it will depend on the terms of the bilateral engagement, and those are not up for discussion as yet. We're only discussing with India, as we've done with so many others, a framework agreement that will be signed. The framework agreement will say we will cooperate in all of these areas, but when you come to discussing specific initiatives, for example, if they want to buy crude, then they will make a specific offer, and we will then assess that offer on its merit in accordance with the principles that I outlined before. And similarly, if they want to engage in a bilateral discussion on exploration and development, a specific proposal will be made, and that will be done. So there is no such agreement. We're dealing with a framework agreement. There are a few other areas in the MOU, and I suspect that once it's signed, it will be in the public domain, because it's a general MOU. We also, in India, we met with, I saw a number of people saying, oh, we're buying boats and aircrafts from India. We have made it clear this was somehow in India, there was a feeling that we're buying these for military purposes, and I had to make the point that in Guyana's case, we're exploring the purchase of these vessels as well as the aircraft for civilian purposes, that we're not fighting war with our neighbors, that there are the vessels would allow us to exercise greater sovereignty over our exclusive economic zone. We now need vessels that would allow us to tackle illegal fishing, probably tackle drug trafficking offshore, better police our waters, and then the aircrafts we're looking for are basically to allow us to better service the hinterland community, including if the freight costs are too high for goods and services to many of these remote areas and with pushes up the cost of living, to use those to ferry freight from the city into these remote communities at a rate that is lower than some of the exorbitant rates charged by some private operators. And that's where, so they're exploring the aircrafts. And some of the aircrafts that they have now that's being used in the Indian military, they're suited for that purpose. We sought to get something similar to the Skyvan, but you know those were discontinued, the production of those. So we're told that these can operate on short runways and they can carry a lot of cargo. So just to put at rest this so-called, we have not purchased anything as yet. We're exploring the purchase of these. We're looking at the specifications, the pricing, and of course, assessing these in relation to other offers that we have on the table. You've had issues where at one stage someone said we'd lose our civil airworthiness basically because of this, buying these aircrafts, and I think that issue has been settled definitively by the Civil Aviation Authority. They made a statement on these issues, that these would not affect our overall standing because there's some procedures for certifying aircrafts of that type. But we have not made no decision at this point in time. We're just exploring these. We look at markets competitively. That's one thing about this government. We're not just going to go and buy something just like that. We are exploring everything else. We have just explored and got some quotation for solar units. A 1 megawatt unit in India could cost maybe 50% of what we're paying for a similar 1 megawatt unit through a competitive bidding process now. 50% of it for the solar. And by the way, the MOU also, the MOU is not on crude, it's on energy, because the MOU covers renewable energy too, and it covers also solar energy. So it is not just about oil and gas, the first MOU that I spoke of. We met also in the agricultural sector, and we're looking as consistent with the plan to look at higher levels of productivity in the agricultural sector at this point in time in every industry, and to move from a peasant type yield much more. They're really great at some things like nano fertilizer, so we explored the use of nano fertilizer. We're told that 2 pounds of nano fertilizer can be as effective as, say, about 45 pounds of regular urea if you use nano fertilizer. Tissue culture, we're going to be working with India, expanding the tissue culture facility we have here in a major way. When we look at our nurseries now, they're anemic. They can't be part of, they can't supply the planting material that we need at scale and the quality through the current method. And so with tissue culture, you can do millions of plants in a short period of time, but everyone having the same consistency and productivity as the other one because of tissue culture. So we are going to be working with India to bring in these facilities here. It would be a big, huge opportunity for Guyanese to work in these areas. It will be a big boost to say, our cane farm industry. We need planting material now of a high quality. We can get 1 million plants in a short period of time. And also everything else, almost any tree that's grown, you can culture it through tissue culture in the lab and then produce plants of high quality. We're looking at that in aquaculture, in the spices, in the livestock development, a whole range, coconut growing. We're thinking about putting large swathes of land that the state has along the banks of the river, especially areas that are prone to flooding on the coconut cultivation, but we need to get better quality material. They brought in some from Brazil. So India is a powerhouse in agriculture research and development. They practically feed 1.4 billion people themselves with very little import and with high levels of productivity. We're looking at biogas and biofuels. And so we spent a lot of time at a very practical level starting to, so we were hoping over the next few months that a lot of these specialists will be recruited and brought to Ghana to give a big boost to the agriculture sector and expand its productivity. We met with the Minister of Health. We are looking to India again. As you know, we're building 12 new hospitals this year. We have to get the people to manage these hospitals and to staff them. India can help in this regard to not only supply people, but also train a lot of Guyanese at the requisite level to man these hospitals that we would have. We probably need 1,500 to 2,000 people, new healthcare professionals in two and a half years once these hospitals are completed. We need a more electronic, technical way of managing these hospitals through patient record systems, which means implementing new systems for the entire country. So India has done this well in many areas and cheaply compared to many of the proposals that we're getting that are commercial in nature. So we're hoping that they would assist in these areas too. So I'm going on for a while, but the trip was at a practical level to work at bringing the requisite help to many of the sectors now that we're hoping to develop, consistent with Guyana's plan to give leadership on food security. On the environment, great capacity here. I'm going to stop there because I just wanted to bring people up to date. I've had tons of calls about the trip, and I wanted to do this quick press conference to ensure that people, I didn't have to speak to reporters individually. There have been a lot of misrepresentation in the media about what the trip was about, and I hope I corrected some of those. Thank you. Yes, please.
Marcel Thomas from the South. I just wanted to know if a date has been decided on when the MOU will be signed, and if one of the government officials from India will be coming here for that signing.
I can't give you a date. It's before the Cabinet of India. It has to go to the Cabinet of India, and then once it receives their approval, that will be signed. But the Foreign Minister of India, I don't know if that's in the public domain already,
No, you can tell us.
will be visiting, I hope I can, will be visiting that. Yes. Yes, please, yes, go on.
On the sustainability part, did Ghana commit to sharing all of that with what's up there? We heard that.
Yes, about Ghana, yes, yes.
Did Ghana commit to sharing all of our of doing the sustainability to all other countries? We have to address the macro before we can have micro.
Sure. We've worked. There's a working group now, a high-level working group. I don't want to speak about it as yet because it will be announced soon. That would look at forestry issues in a major way to ensure that they get their appropriate expression in the COP negotiations and to highlight the role that forests can play. But in our case, we have worked already with countries in Africa. I've met when this was since when I was president and just after. They asked me, when the African leaders met with countries in the tree forest basins, they asked me to be the roving ambassador. So we met with places like Congo, the president of Congo, that is Brazzaville. And we have shared already, we have a good working relationship with them. What we are doing there, we sent many of our people there, they sent some of their staff here. We are looking to expand that. In India, I met with the Minister of Environment from Sri Lanka, and he wanted to find out more about this. And I promised to send one of our staff at the technical level into Sri Lanka to brief them about how we went about doing this. I suspect particularly in Africa, because we've already had some requests, and we're looking to collaborate. You know, Gabon is also one of those countries that have been in the forefront of the fight. I remember working with President Bongo a long time back to give forests greater profile around forests. He is still pushing that in Africa. So we are committed to sharing all that we've done. We made that offer some time ago to Suriname. I went there, I met with them. Their offer is open. We said the same thing to Belize when the Prime Minister was here. We met with him when he was passing through here. So we're open to sharing everything that we've done with all the countries that need that help.
The national gas strategy, is there a timeline for this? Will they come on stream before the project is finished?
I can't give you a timeline now, but we're working on it. But before the end of this year, before the end of this year, we will have that strategy in place.
And on the agricultural,
But that doesn't mean, because sometimes people confuse that. They say, how do you don't have a national gas strategy, but you're pursuing the gas to energy project. So that is clearly defined. What we're going to use the gas for there has been defined already, the 50 million cubic. We said to Exxon, the pipeline that we're paying for already will have, and that is feasible in itself, will have the capacity to bring in more gas. That we have to start the discussions very early about utilizing the pipeline to the full capacity. So that means that maybe another 70 to 80 million cubic feet of gas every day. How do we use that? That is what we're discussing now. There's been a lot of, we went out already to expression of interest, and a lot of interest has been expressed as to how to utilize the gas. Would it be fertilizer, basalt plant, etc. So we are moving ahead faster on that bit. The national gas strategy is the fines. We've had some fines that Pluma, which is mainly gas, and some of the other areas in the southern part of the Staple block. And then we have this associated gas. Exxon had argued at the beginning that they need all of the associated gas pumped back into the wells to keep the quality of the wells up. We have a different view on this matter. We have a different view on this matter. So that is why the gas utilization plan has to be done, and we are working on our gas strategy. And the discussions have to take place about how we monetize the gas there. The gas that are associated gas, and we made it clear, if they're not going to utilize it, like Pluma, they'd have to relinquish it. And we may find other people who are prepared to utilize the gas. And I'm saying this totally, as we said it before. So that is what we're working on, to define the bigger strategy for the gas industry.
Okay, but one question. For the agricultural divisions, what is India's take in this regard? It sure so much less going to the harvest to mass track production. What are we doing in return?
No, some of this we're buying the specialist, but they come cheaper from India and from some other countries than from, yes, the Western countries. And they're high quality specialists. People who have done this before. So they come in, they walk straight into the field. They walk into the research body and start doing work. We don't want the consultant type writing, the report writing consultants to come here. We want people who have actually gone and established a biodiesel facility, who've established it and can come here and now say, here are the things you need to do to establish a biofuel facility or an ethanol facility.
Good afternoon, Vice President.
Yeah.
Dr. Ashley Singh announced a few months ago 3 more coal companies land and coal mines coming here. Can you say if they have arrived, what concessions or lands were granted to them, and if you make that contract available to the public?
Yes, so,
Can I ask 2 more?
yeah, so that's one question. Yeah, just ask all the questions now, because today I don't have much time for dialogue. I have to go to reviews.
Would you be capping the interest rates on the investments of the current, and kindly say what's the rate we are paying at the moment on the 40 billion Exxon's investments out there? Will you ring fence this 5th project before approving it? Ring fencing the commission.
A lot of these questions were asked and answered before. I'm not going to go back over issues. So let me,
Right.
so are we ready? I answered that the last time, and I said to you, I used the clock chicken analogy, and obviously you don't understand it up to now. So I'm not going to waste my time today answering everything and a platform for GAF here. All right, 4 questions, and I'll answer the 4 questions. So the first thing is that we believe, based on the existing arrangements in place, that we have a capability to deal with the oil spill now. We've evolved the contracts and this capacity has to grow. And by the way, I forgot that we're bringing some specialists from India too to work in the EPA in precisely this area that we spoke about. We met with the people, they're going to come in to strengthen that department. So we have moved from an early license, that is an environmental permit that had very little provisions for any of these things. So let me go back again for the umpteenth time. The EPA permits that we have issued for the licenses that we have issued since we got into office, they have included treatment of wastewater up to an international standard before discharge, and progressively that standard increases. Many countries in the world, in the developed world, discharge the water just like that into the Atlantic. They don't have standards like us here. They discharge the water in the same Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. We have higher standards than many of these countries. We have a no flaring policy. No flaring policy. So I saw some international group talking about be careful about flaring in the future ones. The policy is no flaring beyond the commissioning period. Beyond the commissioning period, no flaring. So that's the policy. If you flare beyond the commissioning period, the period authorized by the EPA to flare, you pay a fine that is based on carbon emission. Very few countries in the world now have that. The oil and gas companies in the early permit never had a cradle-to-grave responsibility for cradle-to-grave management of waste. They leave this in many countries when they go, or leave it with their subcontractors. We have agreed to all of this. In the last one, we decided that something that Exxon didn't want to do all along, that to bring in the capping stock in the country, to have one of those based in the country. So they said it's too costly to bring it here. It costs tens of millions of dollars. In the last permit, they have to have one in the country, and two, a subscription to an international company that can supply capping stock, so in case you have a spill. Very few countries in this region have that. So those are progressive measures to deal with any possibility if you have a spill, should you have a spill. But why this crocodile tears now? What about 100 years ago? Where were you when Trinidad was producing oil, pumping oil all the time? Were you worried about Trinidad having adequate measures? What if they have a spill in Trinidad or in there, and it comes along our coast? For 100 years, Trinidad has been producing gas and oil too, smaller quantities, and nobody suddenly were worried about that. Suddenly, Guyana, in Guyana's case, we've dealt with all of this convenient, higher than thou, holier than thou, high horse attitude. It's pure nonsense, utter nonsense. Because if our standards are higher than many countries in the world that are producing oil and gas now, including some in the US. So maybe you should take up the case with some of those countries too. On the interest rates and the other stuff that you mentioned, the answer is they're all part of the Stabroek block. We made it clear. Those arrangements, the president pointed out, there will be no renegotiation. He explained why, of the Stabroek block. We have effectively, I saw Cultural News conveniently again played something that I said. The context was that we were concerned about the renegotiation, the ring fencing and everything else. I've expressed concern from day one about that. But we made it clear in opposition. I can find you a tape in opposition weeks before the election. We were not convenient weeks before the election. I'll find you a recording at a press conference when I was asked definitively weeks before the election, and we said no. We didn't change the position. So we talked about contracts before. We've effectively renegotiated 9 of those contracts, 9 of the 10 contracts, by changing the terms of the PSA, because they all have to now comply. There were 10 of them, including the Kaichor and Kanji and all of them. They now have to comply with the new terms of the PSA, which is a 10% royalty, 10% tax, 65% for cost recovery. That's what is being done. Effectively renegotiated. So you chose a part and you didn't see contracts. I said contract. You said Jagdeo promised to renegotiate Exxon contract. I never said that. I spoke about the contracts, that these contracts will have to come into compliance. I was speaking about generally, and then when asked specifically about the Exxon one, I said no. But you clip little pieces and it goes down well for the fantasy land that you live in. But it's not fact. It's not fact. We've been consistent throughout. We're wanting you not fine. You're not going to lead us by the nose. You can lead Norton and Ramjatan and get them to say what you want because they don't have a clue about what's going on. Imagine Norton talking about and Ramjatan expressing shock now and surprise about some of the things that he was at the center of defending when they were in office. They got defending. And Norton talking about ring fencing, but he's very, if you listen to him, I don't know really if he supports or he doesn't support. I think it's largely because he wants to sit on the fence, please the extreme now, and then still maintain some modicum of credibility if he has any. So I think these questions are answered. I'm not using this forum. I've been very tolerant at press conferences. I've given you a lot of time, but I'm not going to belabor points every time answering the same question over and over. There hasn't been a new issue in the Kaichor news for the last several years. Not a single new issue. It's the same thing regurgitating every day and just conveniently drawing and misrepresenting international reports. Total misrepresentation. Taking little bits out of them and conveniently building a story about them. No credibility whatsoever. So today, it's a busy day for me. Maybe another day I'll be tolerant. I got to go to Corby's. Yes,
so the question I asked.
No, you answer. Give the gentleman your thing.
The insurance I asked has.
Okay, the insurance. I told you the EPA. They have to get the parent company guarantee. I have expressed concerns myself. If you think you're just concerned, we are building capacity in these sectors. Some of the concerns are also our concern. The parent guarantee should have been done already. The parent should have been done already. Okay. It has to be done soon. We told the EPA, give this Exxon a deadline. Give them a deadline for doing this. It should have been done. You're right on. It should have been done.
Capping the interest rate has nothing to do with the
all right. Please give the gentleman and answer the other question.
Mr. Vice President, over 10 persons have been charged by the police to be arrested on the incident in June last year. The PNCR issued a statement calling for the government to drop the charges. Your thoughts? How do you respond to this?
Well, the PNC love PPP supporters. I think the PNC really like our people. Because when this happened, they said all the people who committed these acts were PPP plants. That we planted those people to commit the illegality. So suddenly now they want the charges dropped on these people who were charged. Now, clearly, it might be APNU who planted these individuals. We're always going to be supportive of peaceful protest in any democracy. In any democracy, you have to be tolerant of protest. You have to guarantee people's right to express themselves openly, even in opposition to the government. Now, clearly, the people of Golden Grove, they had cause for concern, because I am personally horrified about what happened to that young man there. It is unacceptable what happened to him. So clearly the people had cause to express concern. But expression of concern has to be done peacefully. They could have protested peacefully. But when these elements join the protest and they engage in terrorism and terroristic activities in relation to other people, destroying their livelihoods, beating them up, then the state has to intervene and come down with the full force of the law on those individuals. Not peaceful protesters. There were many peaceful protesters. So those people will never, if the signal is clear to them, they will never again, the troublemakers and the protest, those who are extreme in nature, they will understand that that behavior will not be tolerant in a democracy. So that is these people must face the law. You have a right to protest, but you don't have a right to destroy and to harm other people.
This is the second question.
But the same APNU, very convenient. What else do you expect from them?
That's the second question. Sections of society have been calling for the indigenous communities not to accept the carbon credit payment of 15%. Do you think this is justified or adequate?
So, I saw some organizations, a known individual who has been one of those who've been always against our LCDS. Now people hail the 2009 LCDS as sector leading and one of the first in the world. The world is going that route now, what we did in 2009. And some of these same people were opposed to it. The Vulcans and the others, the Janet Vulcans and the others, the APA. And you recall them writing Norway to block our funds. You go down that list of people who wrote Norway. That's the group that I'm talking about, that resurrects themselves in different clothing. They always surface in a different guise now. They always surface, and they're surfacing again. The fossils of the past, the Heinz and these groups. So imagine that person who lives abroad says the indigenous leaders are complicit with the government. 242 communities that got over $22.5 million US now sitting in their bank account that they can spend for the development of their villages through an involved and a consultative process with the people who live in those communities. They have to give the approval to how to utilize the resources. That those people are complicit with us in committing an illegality. That person lives abroad. So she's not even indigenous, but can lecture the 242 elected leaders about what they should do and what they shouldn't do. But then they will go and shout, you need FPIC, free, prior, informed consent. but they can speak on behalf of the indigenous people. The same thing with the APA here. The APA gets funds from the international community to not to help the villages, but to fund its own activities and to block these initiatives. They will not find a single cent to put in these communities, but they're negative all the time. So we have to forge ahead. These leaders came here, they were elected by their people, they were representing them. Some of these communities, if you look on average, I saw Kite Shore News again, put that of the $700 and something million, 22.5 million will be given to the people. 22.5 of the $700 million. And it's a lie. And it was front page headline. It's 22.5 million of the 150 million that we received this year alone. If you look at the 700 million, they will get 113 million US dollars. That is what is equivalent to 15%. But the biggest headline is basically Amerindians giving a pittance, 22.5 million of the 700 million. It's a blatant lie. It helps to feed this sort of thing. Total lie. And it's supported by the newspaper, basically. So those NGOs, they will go on and lament. Yes.
Good day, Michelle.
Yes,
three questions from me. The first one, during your visit to India, did either India or Indian companies say they will be participating in the auction this year? Secondly, there were some talks about a vaccine manufacturing plant or a hub of some sort. How those talks advanced with both India and Rwanda? And finally, the concerns about foreign currency shortages, is that engaging your attention and what can be done about that?
Sure. So on the health sector, there's been discussion about that. I saw Leslie Ramsamy mention it, and it's clearly this has been an old issue here about the safety of our people. And given what happened in the pandemic, we've been exploring the possibility of regional security with vaccines. And so there was discussion with the Indian government about the possibility of producing some vaccines here in Ghana. So those discussions will continue at the government-to-government level and at the company level. So we believe we can make progress on it, but it's early stages, very early stages. But the idea is to ensure that we have security in the future, because you saw what happened in the pandemic. We could not get supplies for our people in this part of the world. Africa faced a similar problem. That's why there's a discussion with Rwanda to do the same thing. We can't rely on the developed world in the future to supply these. So that's the first issue. The second one about India again, what is it?
The ongoing auction, India or
Oh yes, the auction. So we, I know there are a number of companies that have registered already. I don't think there's any company from India that has been registered for the auction. So, but we raised the possibility because our job is to market the auction to ensure as many people as possible put in tenders. Because the more tenders we get, it would be better for us as a country. Remember, there's a minimum price you have to pay and all of that. We're hoping the auction would be fully subscribed. But we didn't discuss anything. That's a commercial sort of thing. We discussed mainly bilateral engagements through the MOU, but not directly with the companies. Although we expressed the desire, as we have done with everyone else, and openly even at the energy conference here, that we would like to see more people participate in the auction. I'm going to the Cerro week next week, in Houston. So we will again probably encourage people to participate in the auction. On the issue of foreign currency, clearly we have the central bank and the Ministry of Finance. They have a job in our economy from a macroeconomic perspective. Often at the level of the enterprise and at the chamber level, their view may not take into account the macro picture. But it doesn't mean that the government has to pander to that, although it has to be aware of what's going on in the markets. Now clearly, you've seen the central bank's response yesterday. The central bank has a role of promoting price stability. It has a role of controlling the money supply. It has to ensure that the money supply, along with the fiscal policy, that they are conducive to growth, and that they, in the long run, they don't cause, particularly now, given that we have oil and gas proceeds flowing into the economy, that they do not cause us to suffer the dreaded Dutch disease. So, if you talk to manufacturers and the people in agriculture, the exporters, they don't want the exchange rate to appreciate. Because if the exchange rate appreciates, it would kill those export industries, kill them, as has happened in many countries in the world. So eventually the economy starts relying only on the oil and gas related industries. And that's proven economics. The importers, and many are in the chamber, they prefer a rate, a US dollar rate that is appreciating, so they pay less Guyana dollars for the exchange, for the US dollar. And often, when we look at it, it's not passed on in final prices. So what they finally get, because they get exchange rate that is cheaper, or foreign currency that is cheaper, they end up with bigger margins. So you often have a conflict between the objectives of the two sectors. But the government has to ensure that aggregate demand and aggregate supply in the market, that they tend to reach some equilibrium given the objectives that I just mentioned of the central bank and the Ministry of Finance. And when we look at the market, you always have seasonal variations. So you have periods, like in the Christmas season, some people come in, you have more foreign currency, and then you have periods of low, and then periods where you have more supply to the market. When you look at the market itself, the market in aggregate is clearing. But as I explained sometime before, that you have not one market, not an aggregate market, but every CAMU in this country operates like a mini market within the aggregate market. So it truncates the supply and demand for currency. So one bank, that Exxon was selling to one bank, Scotia Bank, and they would have an abundance of supply, but maybe some other bank may not have the same amount of currency at that same time. But if you had an interbank market and they share, or people don't keep money only for their customers, like some of the banks do, then people would be able to go to another bank and clear. and get the currency. So we have to now work at promoting greater exchanges. So I think, we've been exploring something. I was thinking about this, and I have to discuss it with the finance minister, that maybe we need a daily balance reported to the central bank of currencies purchased and sold and the daily balance of all the institutions, and then the list of demand. And you will see in most cases that they're clear, but it's just that they exist in different institutions. So if I'm more banking with GBTI or Bank X, let me don't use a bank. Which bank? I'm banking with Bank X. My bank, I go to them for foreign currency. They may not have at this moment, but another bank has excess. So that's what we need to do. That is why the ministry, the central bank said the conversation that they should have is between the Chamber and the Private Sector Commission and the Bankers Association and the others to have the market work more efficiently, not necessarily with the government. But we can't be pandering every time the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce wants to issue a statement. We can't be pandering to that. We have to look at the macroeconomic objective. And those are the same people sometimes who will come and talk about Dutch disease. Oh, you have to avoid the Dutch disease. You have to avoid the Dutch disease. So we have a firm view on the objectives, what the macroeconomic objectives are. And if we believe that there is a sustained shortage, we have the means to supply the market. We have the means to supply the market. But we don't want to supply the market and so that the rate appreciates. So a few people can get cheaper foreign currency. We can't do that. It will go against the macroeconomic objective.
Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned a number of companies already registered for the auction. Can you perhaps say how many and perhaps where they're...
Get that from Vikram Bharat. Yes.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jagdeo, PMO Architecture News. Just a few questions.
Yes.
I want to go back to your statement on the MOU with India. Can you explain for us what are some of the benefits government is hoping to achieve by having a pool of offshore blocks available for bilateral relations? What is government hoping to achieve with that compared to the commercial type option that you have ongoing?
And this is not just with India, with all the bilaterals. So we believe that beyond the regime, the new regime in the PSA, that this could probably, if we work at the bilateral level, the returns could be because there'll be some ownership now. So we may very well go to ownership structure. You'll be part of the ownership of the block. So they'll be owned between the bilaterals. So you share, you get the taxes and the royalties because by virtue of them operating in the sector. So these companies will have to still comply with the fiscal regime, but then you get some of the proceeds distributed to, that is from the profits made by virtue of ownership. So that is what we have to explore.
Okay. And secondly, with regard to the audits of the ExxonMobil costs, can you say what system or mechanism government will use to address any discovery of inflated costs? How do you intend to disincentivize that type of practice?
Yeah, so the audit has been submitted and it's been sent to Exxon. Now they have 2 months to respond and on all our findings. And then you'll have a rework here and we say, we agree with your explanations, because like in any audit, you have to send it. You have to give explanations as to all the findings. And then once that's done, we can say we accept or we don't accept. So if there is a dispute, there is a dispute resolution arrangement there. So let us await that. Let us await their response. It's an area that we have to pay a lot of attention to, and that is why it's so crucial that we build a capacity locally, because a lot of the international audit firms also work for the oil majors. And so it's important that we have localized, well-trained localized, to also do the audits, to do these audits in the future. Like we've done here, we have a combination of local companies and an international company working together. So we're hoping we can expand that.
Okay, just to follow up on that, could you say the government is thinking along the lines of penalties in the event that...
Yeah, but if it's disallowed, then you disallow. So if we disallow the expense, it has to be removed from the cost band.
Right.
If we disallow it, so it has to be removed from the cost band.
Okay. And thirdly, with regard to some of the statements government receives from ExxonMobil in terms of cost recovery as well as the forecast of expenditure for a given quarter, can you say if government is interested in releasing some of these documents so that we can see the rate at which some of the costs are being retired?
Yeah, sure. But let me tell you something. The thing in this environment, if a lot of this is proprietary, but in this environment with an organization like the Kite News, I'll never want to release that because they will nitpick. It's a nitpicking. They will take one word out of it and create a story and lie about it. That, I'm not saying that personally. Please don't take it personal. But this is what it's about. Every little thing. There are some standard practices in the industry, like around the world. In no country in the world, you will find that intermediate reports being released all the time to the media. You show me a country that's been doing this, and I'll say, okay, where oil operations are, and we will do it. But they don't have a media house like Culture News, frankly speaking, that would lie. You know, look at every single thing. Every single thing. We've released all of the reports, the environmental permit. APNU didn't put those on their website, the two that they issued. I ordered that they put all of them on their website. Not as one day Kite News showing the difference, the qualitative difference, and how the permits of today are more akin to the global standards than when they started. But they will still get the man who signed the earlier permits to be the specialist, Vincent Adams. He is the specialist on Kite News and will talk about all of these conveniently, how you must do permits today. But he signed on to the two that were so mediocre that it should really be, well, we had to change their terms now. We had to change their terms. That is what we're faced with. When I say, I did some interviews, clearly, if the Kite News was interested in and there's a role for media to hold government to account and also the oil and gas companies, the serious account on these issues. Because sometimes you do have lapses and you need to get that done. But you can't be a campaign of light and be so duplicitous. You got the man who signed the crappy permits, being the specialist and speaking about the permits that are akin to international standards. Where is the credibility? So that is what I'm talking about. Release of information is not for the purpose of an analysis here. It's for the purpose of misrepresentation. They just want it for that purpose. Misrepresentation. That is the dilemma we face. But let's see if we can, we'll explore all of it. We'll be open to looking at everything and seeing what more could be done. On the EITI issues, we're looking at some of these issues, exactly that, what could be released and what is proprietary. So,
I just wanted to follow up on EITI.
okay.
EITI has been suspended from the Norwegian-based EITI.
Yes, yeah.
You know all about that issue. My thing is, one, why, or has government has an explanation to why the Minister of Natural Resources sought to have a one-on-one with the organization for an extension? And
I didn't get that. I think Vikram Bharat, what he did, he spoke extensively, and he is directly involved. And he spoke extensively about his experience, what happened. So I would like to refer you back to what he said. But there are some crucial points that he made. He said he spoke with them. There's a go on. So, sorry.
Before you go to that, because there is a guideline in the standards that a process has to be taken.
Yes.
They can't have that one-on-one. So why would he then seek that one-on-one? That's my question for one.
Yes.
And two, is there an explanation, or has there been an explanation from the head of GYEITI, Mr. Mizir, on his 4-month absence from the body?
Yeah. So, first of all, on that matter, I think the minister had discussions. I think this is an ongoing thing, but clearly he recognized that we could not meet the deadline. And I think he sought to engage and ask for an extension, the head of the EITI. He explained that in his I think it was a TV program. I was abroad, but I look at the transcript, and I saw that he said, I knew we could not meet the deadline. I spoke with the gentleman. I thought we had an extension up to July, and we were working to get it done to July. Then to my surprise, we got suspended now. And then he gave an explanation. He said, we have been unable to do this because we had the international administrator, I think it's what it's called. But we couldn't clear the terms of reference. It's been sitting there for a while, that the meetings that were held all had to do with the head of the EITI Guyana, Greg Mizir, rather than the terms of reference. And that led to some of the delays. And then he pointed out to some of the people there. Now, when I spoke about people who have been blocking almost everything, almost like I believe they get paid internationally to block things, you see an example of that. What civil society, who does a Mike McCormack represent in civil society? On that body, we don't have the Private Sector Commission. Now, the Private Sector Commission and the Labor Movement are the two largest civil society bodies in any country. And they're not represented on this secretariat. But McCormack, McCormack has no organization practically, nothing. He's there, and he's one of the biggest humbugs, not only here, to everything under the sun. So the thing is that we need to call this up, because they masquerade again, like they've done in the past, as civil society organizations. So right now, from what I gather, it's that the work is ongoing. We're on track to submit the report by July. And the work is ongoing now. And you should talk to the minister about absent. I don't even know if that's true.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jagdeo. This is the Vino with Credit Unions. Sir, on the government agreement for our oil blocks, can you say if they'll be subjected to the terms of the new PSA being drafted? And will there be signing bonuses? And you spoke about the framework that will govern.
I also, it's the India thing? You just asked about India?
Not just of India. You spoke about other countries who are interested in our oil blocks. So I'm
Yes.
asking if they'll be subjected to the same terms of the new PSA, if they'll be signing bonuses. And you mentioned the framework to govern the exchange.
But clearly, you can't understand the qualitative difference between governments working with governments than a commercial arrangement. That's what we said. I explained earlier about the PSA terms. But this is not for private purposes. This is government working directly with the government. So all of the proceeds will be shared if we manage to get this off between the two governments.
So will that framework be made public then?
There is no framework at this point in time. What framework? What framework are you talking about? Which framework?
So
Which
you have no
framework?
plan as to how this thing is going to happen, but you're in.
No, but what framework? You just mentioned what framework are you
You
talking about?
mentioned the framework to govern.
No, I'm talking about a framework agreement with India, governing renewable energy, covering fossil fuel, gas, covering technical assistance, exploring the sale of crude, covering investments. And I said here that this is just a framework agreement. What framework agreement you're talking about?
Okay, thank you very much for your response, sir. I would like to know, let me rephrase my question if you did not get me.
All right, but please don't go on too long. I got to go now. Yes.
I would like to know,
I have to be out of here in 5 minutes.
I would like to know how Guyana is going to benefit in those, in
I explained earlier that the question was asked, how is this better than, say, working through an auction? What's the difference between going to an auction and having a private company develop this versus a bilateral arrangement? So I anticipate that we will get, as I said before, the same sort of tax benefits that we're getting from the development. But in addition to that, we will become part owners. The country will become part owners of the development.
Thank you.
So you then get revenue if it goes to a development as by virtue of ownership. And that will complement what you get from the taxes. That is how it works. That's why bilateral. And it's not going to be owned by any individual. It's owned between the companies.
Thank you, sir. On the gas to energy project, can you say what measures are being put in place for Guyana to repay the loans associated with developing the project?
I can't, you're reading too fast there. What's the question? Just explain quickly. Yeah, one more question.
Can you say what measures are being put in place for Guyana to repay the loans associated with developing the gas to energy project, should it not be able to meet the financial requirements in an event, in an unfortunate event?
Oh, what unfortunate event you're talking about?
If there's an explosion and we're not able to, the plants are not being operational, how do we repay the expenses?
Can we get out of this morbidity? It's Kaichorios are morbid. Imagine we must not build a power plant because we might have an explosion there. So let people
Sorry, I'm not saying that we should not build a power
but
plant.
but the thing is that this is in effect what you're saying. Are you saying that which government starts off by anywhere in the world by saying that, oh, we're not going to pursue a development, or we're going to make mitigating plans to pay back a facility if we have an explosion. Nobody builds a facility on the basis of that. Nobody builds a facility on the basis of a future explosion. We're building this gas to energy project, so upon its completion, we'd have 300 megawatts of power that would allow us to cut electricity prices by 50% for the people of this country, that will bring stability to the grid, that would allow us to start exporting cooking gas so we can sell it for cheap, that would allow us also that based on the finances, the sale of the liquids alone, we can pay back the loan. From the sale of the liquids, pay back the loan, operate the plants, etc. So effectively, although I said it's 4 cents per kilowatt hour, you're having free power, because if you can pay back the infrastructure costs from the sale of the liquids and the gas is free, then effectively you're getting power for zero. But what if anything happens tomorrow? What if the existing power plant, we took a loan for what? Let me say something else. If we had a loan in GPL, and the GPL blows up tomorrow, what are we going to do? We'd have to repay the loan through some other means, the existing means. You can't build these things. It's a morbid. You've run out of things on the gas to energy now. We're going to, what if it breaks up? What if it falls in the sea? What if the pipeline gets a little hole here? How can a government operate on what ifs? We're hoping that in these issues, nobody builds anything. Glenland would put up that big building that he complained about. What if the top story fall off? He had a loan in the bank. What if the whole foundation collapses? He has a loan. How will he repay the loan? He has to repay it from some other source.
Thank you very much.
I can't understand this. When are we going to end with this morbid, sour kind of approach here all the time? Thank you.
My very first question, sir, you didn't touch it.